The void where the Andromedan Empire once blazed with a trillion lights now held only the cold whisper of cosmic radiation and the skeletal remains of dead worlds. Commander Zara Okafor pressed her palm against the observation deck's reinforced viewing port, watching debris fields drift like metallic snow through the darkness. Each fragment had once been part of something greater, a ship, a station, a home. "How many?" she asked without turning from the window. Lieutenant Torres consulted his quantum tablet, the blue glow reflecting off his weathered face. "Latest count puts it at 14 billion confirmed dead across the Andromedan sector alone. That's just what we can verify from the wreckage patterns." 14 billion. The number sat in Zara's chest like a stone. In her 43 years, 30 of them spent in the Terran Defense Corps, she had witnessed the systematic destruction of entire star systems. The Great War, though no one called it that anymore, preferring the sanitized term, galactic conflict, had raged for over 2 centuries, consuming civilizations like a wildfire consuming forests. "And the others?" she asked. "Vegan Collective lost their core worlds 3 months ago. Zephyrian Republic is down to 17 habitable planets from 47. The Silicon Hegemony." Torres paused. "We haven't heard from them in 8 standard months." Zara finally turned from the window. The command deck of the TDS Prometheus hummed around them with the quiet efficiency of a ship holding together through sheer determination. Most of her crew were too young to remember a time before the war, but Zara could still recall her grandmother's stories of trade routes that spanned the galaxy, of cultural exchanges between species, of a time when meeting an alien ship meant celebration rather than preparation for battle. "Ma'am," Communications Officer Chen called from her station. "We're receiving a priority transmission. Coded for you specifically." Zara nodded, settling into her command chair. The holographic display materialized above the central console, resolving into the weathered face of Admiral Marcus Kane, head of the Terran Defense Corps. Behind him, through the windows of his station, Earth hung like a blue-white jewel, one of the few worlds that had managed to avoid direct assault. "Commander Okafor." Kane's voice carried the weight of exhaustion. "I'm uploading classified intel to your personal storage. We've received contact from a previously unknown species." Zara felt her pulse quicken. First contact protocols had been all but abandoned 15 years ago when the last neutral species, the crystalline resonance, had chosen a side and entered the conflict. The idea that someone had managed to remain hidden during 2 centuries of galactic war seemed impossible. "Species designation?" she asked. "They call themselves the Keplerians. Homeworld is in the Kepler 442 system. Here's the remarkable part. They claim to have a solution." "A solution to what, sir?" Kane's expression was grim. "To all of it, Commander. They say they can end the war." The transmission ended, leaving Zara staring at the space where Kane's image had been. Around her, the bridge crew exchanged glances. In 200 years of conflict, dozens of species had claimed to have solutions. Peace treaties, technological advantages, diplomatic frameworks, all had failed. The galaxy was too broken, the hatred too deep, the resources too depleted. But something in Kane's voice suggested this was different. Zara accessed her personal storage and began reviewing the classified files. The Keplerians were humanoid but distinctly alien, tall and willowy with elongated skulls and skin that seemed to shift color with their emotional state. Their technology appeared to be bioorganic in nature, their ships grown rather than built, their cities living organisms that pulsed with bioluminescent networks. What caught her attention, however, was their history. According to the files, the Keplerians had experienced their own version of the Galactic War centuries ago, a devastating conflict that had nearly extinguished their species. They had emerged from that near extinction with what they called the Great Understanding, a philosophical and technological framework that had not only ended their internal conflicts but had allowed them to develop a civilization based on harmony and mutual cooperation. Now they claimed they could teach this understanding to the rest of the galaxy. "Lieutenant Torres," Zara called. "Set course for the Kepler 442 system. Maximum burn." "Ma'am, that's deep in contested space. We'll have to cross 3 active war zones." I'm aware. But if there's even a chance they're telling the truth. She left the sentence unfinished. They all knew what was at stake. The galaxy was dying, and not from external threat or natural disaster, but from its own inhabitants' inability to coexist. As the Prometheus turned toward the distant star system, Zara found herself thinking about her daughter, safe in the Earth colonies but growing up in a universe where peace was a fairy tale told to children. If the Keplerians really had found a way to end the endless cycle of violence, then crossing a few war zones seemed like a small price to pay. She had no way of knowing that her decision would set in motion events that would either save the galaxy or destroy what little remained of it. The Kepler 442 system was unlike anything in Zara's database. As the Prometheus dropped out of hyperspace, the crew stared in wonder at what awaited them. Instead of the industrial stations and defense platforms that surrounded most inhabited systems, they found something that looked more like a vast garden floating in space. Massive bioorganic structures drifted in orbital patterns around the system's planets, connected by streams of what appeared to be luminescent pollen or spores. The structures pulsed with gentle rhythms, and as Zara watched, she realized she was looking at the breathing of living space habitats. Biosigns are off the charts, reported Dr. Sarah Kim, the ship's xenobiologist. These aren't just inhabited structures, they're actually alive. Composed of some kind of symbiotic organism I've never encountered. Getting detailed scans? Zara asked. That's the strange part. The structures are scanning us back, but it doesn't feel hostile. It's more like curiosity. Before Zara could respond, Communications Officer Chen announced an incoming transmission. The main screen filled with the image of a Keplerian, and Zara felt an immediate sense of calm wash over her, an unusual reaction that she noted with professional concern. The Keplerian was tall and graceful, with skin that shifted through subtle shades of blue and green. Its eyes were large and multifaceted, like a combination of human and insect features, but somehow beautiful rather than disturbing. When it spoke, its voice had an almost musical quality. "Welcome, travelers from the broken stars," it said, and somehow Zara understood that the words were being translated not just linguistically but emotionally. "I am Synthesis Pattern of Growing Light, though you may call me Synthesis for the comfort of your linear speech patterns. We have been waiting for you." "Waiting for us specifically?" Zara asked. "Waiting for any who would choose understanding over destruction. Your species, your ship, your personal energy patterns, all indicate a readiness to receive the great understanding. Will you accept our invitation to walk among the Garden of Thoughts?" Zara glanced at her senior officers. Lieutenant Torres looked skeptical, Dr. Kim fascinated, and Security Chief Valdez concerned but alert. The decision was hers, and she found herself thinking again of her daughter, of all the children growing up in a galaxy at war. "We accept," she said. What followed was the most unusual docking procedure in Zara's experience. Rather than mechanical couplings and airlocks, the Prometheus was gently embraced by what appeared to be massive tendrils of living coral. The connection was so gentle and organic that they barely felt the ship's movement as it was drawn into the larger structure. When they emerged from their ship, they found themselves in a vast cavern whose walls pulsed with soft bioluminescence. The air itself seemed alive, filled with floating specks of light that danced around them like friendly spirits. Synthesis was waiting for them, along with several other Keplerians whose skin colors shifted through a rainbow of emotional expressions. "Before we can share the great understanding," Synthesis said, "you must first see what understanding means to us." They were led through passages that were clearly grown rather than built, following patterns that seemed to mirror neural networks or root systems. Along the way, Zara began to notice something remarkable. There were no security measures, no weapons, no defensive positions. For a species that had allegedly survived their own version of galactic war, the Keplerians seemed remarkably trusting. They emerged into a chamber that took Zara's breath away. It was a vast sphere, its walls transparent, showing the space around the habitat. But what filled the sphere was a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, rendered in living light. Each star system glowed with its own color, and as Zara watched, she began to understand that the colors represented the emotional and social state of the civilizations within them. Most of the galaxy pulsed with angry reds and the dark purples of hatred and fear. But scattered throughout were spots of other colors, blue for sadness, green for hope, yellow for cooperation. And at the center of the display, their own location glowed with a warm golden light. "This is the truth map," Synthesis explained. "It shows not the political boundaries your species draw, but the emotional reality of the galaxy. Each color represents the dominant emotional pattern of the civilizations in that region." "How is this possible?" Dr. Kim asked, her scientific curiosity overriding diplomatic protocol. Another Keplerian stepped forward, its skin shifting to curious silver patterns. "We are weaver of distant songs. The answer to your question is both simple and complex. All conscious beings emit what you might call emotional radiation, patterns of thought and feeling that resonate across quantum fields. We have learned to perceive and interpret these patterns." Zara studied the map, noting the clusters of red around the former locations of the major powers. "And you believe you can change these patterns?" "We do not change them," Synthesis said gently. "We offer understanding, and beings change themselves. Watch." The map zoomed in on a small cluster of star systems on the galactic rim, currently pulsing with angry red. As they watched, one system began to shift, the red fading to purple, then to blue, then gradually warming to green and finally to gold. "3 months ago, we made contact with the beings in that system, a small coalition of species that had been locked in conflict for decades. We shared with them the first level of understanding, the recognition that all conscious beings are part of a larger pattern, that harming others ultimately harms oneself." "And they just stopped fighting?" Lieutenant Torres asked skeptically. "Understanding is not instantaneous," Weaver of Distant Songs replied. "But once beings truly comprehend their interconnectedness, violence becomes as unthinkable as deliberately injuring oneself. The process takes time, patience, and most importantly, the willing participation of those seeking peace." Zara felt a stirring of something she had almost forgotten: hope. "You said this was the first level of understanding. How many levels are there?" The Keplerian skin colors shifted to patterns Zara was beginning to recognize as pleasure or satisfaction. 7 levels, Synthesis said. Each building upon the last, each expanding the being's awareness of their place in the cosmic pattern. We ourselves required nearly a century to fully integrate all 7 levels after our own great war nearly destroyed us. And you're willing to teach this to the rest of the galaxy? Willing? Synthesis's skin shifted to what Zara interpreted as amusement. Commander Okafor, this is not charity or diplomacy. This is necessity. The patterns of violence and hatred spreading through the galaxy are disrupting the cosmic emotional field itself. If the current trajectory continues, the damage will become irreversible. The galaxy will lock itself into permanent patterns of conflict, making peace impossible for millions of years. The weight of this revelation settled over the human delegation like a heavy blanket. Zara had known the war was devastating, but the idea that it might be causing permanent damage to the fabric of consciousness itself was terrifying. What do you need from us? She asked. Volunteers, Weaver of Distant Songs said simply. Beings willing to undergo the understanding process and then return to their people as carriers of peace. The process cannot be imposed, it must be chosen freely by each individual. Zara looked at her officers. She could see the same mixture of hope and fear in their faces that she felt in her own heart. This could be the answer they had all prayed for, but it could also be an elaborate trap or delusion. How long does the process take? She asked. For most beings, the first 3 levels can be integrated in a matter of weeks. The higher levels take longer, months or years. But even the first level of understanding is usually sufficient to end immediate conflicts. Dr. Kim stepped forward. I volunteer. Security Chief Valdez looked alarmed. Ma'am, we don't know enough about. Doctor, Zara interrupted gently. Are you certain? Kim nodded firmly. I've studied xenobiology for 20 years, Commander. I've seen what this war has done to dozens of species. If there's even a chance this could help, I have to try. Synthesis's skin brightened to warm gold patterns. Dr. Kim, your willingness honors us. But understand, the process will change you fundamentally. You will still be yourself, but your perspective on existence itself will be transformed. Are you prepared for this? I've been preparing for it my whole life without knowing it, Kim replied. As they made arrangements for Dr. Kim to begin the understanding process, Zara found herself staring at the truth map. The vast expanse of red and purple seemed overwhelming, but she could also see the small golden dots scattered throughout, other species and individuals who had somehow found peace even in the midst of galactic war. Perhaps it was possible. Perhaps the galaxy didn't have to end in fire and hatred. But as she would soon discover, not everyone shared her optimism about the Keplerian solution. While Dr. Kim began her integration with the first level of understanding, Zara found herself in the uncomfortable position of trying to explain the Keplerian proposal to the leaders of a galaxy that had forgotten how to trust. The emergency council session took place in the neutral space station Covenant, one of the few remaining locations where representatives of different species could meet without immediate violence. The station itself was a testament to the war's toll. Its once gleaming corridors were patched with mismatched materials, its life support systems jerry-rigged from salvaged components, its diplomatic chambers bearing scorch marks from past negotiations that had gone wrong. Zara stood before the assembled representatives, feeling the weight of their skepticism and desperation in equal measure. To her left sat Admiral Thexka of the Vegan Collective, her scaled skin bearing the ritual scars of her lost homeworlds. Across from her, General Vorthan of the Zephyrian Republic's mechanical form clicked and whirred with barely contained aggression. At the head of the table, Coordinator Essence of Sharp Calculations represented the few remaining silicon hegemony nodes. "Let me understand this correctly, Commander," Admiral Thexka hissed, her translator rendering her words with an undertone of barely controlled rage. "You want us to believe that a previously unknown species has solved the fundamental problem of galactic warfare through what amounts to meditation? It's more complex than that, Admiral," Zara replied carefully. "The Keplerians have developed a scientific understanding of how emotional and mental patterns propagate through quantum fields. They're not asking anyone to abandon their defensive capabilities. They're offering a framework for understanding why we fight and how to choose different responses." General Vorthan's optical array flickered with what Zara had learned to recognize as machine skepticism. "Commander Okafor, my people have analyzed the data you provided. The Keplerians' biotechnology is impressive, but we see no evidence of the kind of military superiority that would allow them to enforce peace." "That's exactly the point," Zara said, her frustration beginning to show. "They're not trying to enforce peace through superior force. They're offering tools for species to choose peace themselves." Coordinator Essence of Sharp Calculations spoke with the harmonized voice of its collective consciousness. "The mathematics are intriguing but incomplete. We require quantifiable proof that this understanding produces measurable results in conflict reduction." Zara activated her holographic display, showing footage of Dr. Kim's progress over the past week. The biologist had undergone remarkable changes, not physical, but in her entire approach to perception and problem-solving. Her scientific observations had become more intuitive yet paradoxically more accurate. Her interactions with others had gained a quality of presence and compassion that was immediately noticeable. "Dr. Kim has integrated the first level of understanding," Zara explained. "According to the Keplerians, she now perceives the fundamental interconnectedness of all conscious beings. She's still completely herself, but her ability to find nonviolent solutions to problems has increased dramatically." "One test subject proves nothing," Admiral Thexka snapped. "How do we know this isn't some form of sophisticated mind control? How do we know the Keplerians aren't simply preparing us for conquest through psychological manipulation?" It was a fair question, and one that had kept Zara awake for several nights. The possibility that the Keplerians were simply more sophisticated conquerors couldn't be dismissed. But as she had watched Dr. Kim's transformation, she had become convinced that whatever the process was, it wasn't diminishing her colleagues' autonomy or critical thinking. "We've run extensive neurological scans," she said. "Dr. Kim shows no signs of external mental influence. Her brain patterns have changed, but in ways that seemed to enhance rather than restrict her cognitive abilities. Before anyone could respond, the council chamber's emergency alerts began blaring. Through the viewport, they could see ships decelerating from hyperspace, a massive fleet bearing the insignia of the Andromedian remnant. Admiral Thexka was on her feet instantly. How many? Sensor array shows 47 capital ships. Lieutenant Torres reported from his position at the communications console. They're not broadcasting surrender codes. The tension in the room became electric. The Andromedian remnant was one of the most aggressive factions to emerge from the collapse of the old empire. Survivors who had embraced the philosophy that the only way to end the war was through total victory. Incoming transmission, Torres announced. The main display filled with the image of Fleet Admiral Corvash, the Andromedian leader whose reputation for ruthlessness was legendary even in a galaxy grown accustomed to atrocity. His face was a map of surgical scars and bionic implants, testament to decades of warfare. Representatives of the so-called peace conference. He began without preamble. You are ordered to surrender for processing as enemy combatants. The time for negotiation has ended. The Andromedian remnant claims this station by right of superior force. General Vorthan's weapon systems began charging with audible whines. Admiral Corvash, this is neutral territory protected by the Covenant Accords. Your actions constitute. The Covenant Accords died with the billions we lost in this war. Corvash interrupted. There is no neutrality. There is only victory or extinction. Zara felt the familiar weight of impending violence settling over the situation. This was how it always went. Every attempt at peace derailed by those who had invested too much in war to consider alternatives. But then she remembered Dr. Kim's words from that morning. Understanding doesn't mean passive acceptance, Commander. Sometimes the most compassionate action is to provide clear consequences for destructive choices. Admiral Corvash, Zara said, stepping forward. I have a counter-proposal. The Andromedian leader's scarred face twisted into what might have been amusement. You have nothing to negotiate with, human. Actually, I do. Zara activated her personal communicator. Dr. Kim, are you receiving this transmission? I am, Commander, came the reply from the Keplerian habitat. Doctor, you've been working with the Keplerians on understanding conflict patterns. In your professional opinion, what would be the most effective response to Admiral Corvash's threat? There was a pause, and when Dr. Kim spoke again, her voice carried a new quality of certainty. The Admiral is operating from a pattern of trauma-induced desperation masked as aggression. His fleet represents the last organized remnant of his civilization, and he's convinced that violence is the only way to prevent their final extinction. The most effective response would be to demonstrate that nonviolent alternatives can achieve his core objective, the survival of his people, more effectively than conquest. Admiral Corvash's expression had shifted from amusement to suspicion. What psychological trick is this? No trick, Zara said. Dr. Kim has learned to perceive the underlying motivations that drive conflict. Admiral, what would it take for you to consider that there might be a path to Andromedian survival that doesn't require conquering this station? There is no such path, Corvash snarled. We have tried diplomacy, trade agreements, peace treaties. They all end in betrayal and death. Dr. Kim's voice came through the communicator again, gentle but clear. Admiral, the Keplerians have extensive records of civilizations that emerged from total war stronger than before. The pattern you're trapped in, believing that security comes from controlling others, is the same pattern that led to your empire's collapse. But there are other patterns, other ways of ensuring your people's survival. For a moment, something flickered in Corvash's eyes, uncertainty, perhaps even hope. But then his expression hardened again. Words. Empty words while my people die in refugee camps. That's when Synthesis's voice joined the conversation, transmitted from the Keplerian habitat with an odd harmonic quality that seemed to bypass the ear and speak directly to the mind. Admiral Corvash, the Keplerian said, we offer you proof rather than words. Allow us to show you the emotional patterns surrounding your fleet. See for yourself what your current path leads to. The display split, showing both Corvash's scarred face and a new image, a smaller version of the truth map focused on the local area. The Andromedian fleet appeared as a cluster of angry red, but surrounding it were other colors, the deep purple of fear from the station's inhabitants, the orange of confusion from some of Corvash's own ships, and strangest of all, a thread of blue sadness connecting the Admiral himself to the wider pattern. You perceive your isolation as strength, Synthesis continued, but the pattern shows your true situation. You are not leading a conquest, you are orchestrating a final act of desperation. Your own crew questions this action. Some of them are beginning to understand that victory through violence is no longer possible. Corvash stared at the display, and Zara could see the moment when the Admiral recognized the truth in what he was seeing. The confident aggression drained from his face, replaced by exhaustion and something that might have been grief. What would you have me do? He asked quietly. Surrender? Allow my people to be scattered to the winds? Allow us to offer you the understanding, Synthesis replied. Not as conquest or assimilation, but as a tool for finding new solutions. Your people's survival is important to the cosmic pattern. But survival achieved through the destruction of others ultimately destroys the survivor as well. The council chamber fell silent except for the hum of the station's life support. Zara held her breath, knowing that the next few moments could determine whether the galaxy took its first real step toward peace or descended deeper into the cycle of violence. Finally, Admiral Corvash spoke. I will consider your proposal, but I make no promises. My first duty is to my people. As it should be, Synthesis agreed. Understanding does not ask you to abandon your responsibilities, only to expand your perception of how those responsibilities might best be fulfilled. As the transmission ended and the Andromedian fleet moved to a holding position, Zara felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the sense that change, real change, might actually be possible. But she was also aware that they had barely scratched the surface of the galaxy's problems. For every Admiral Corvash who might be willing to listen, there were dozens of other leaders who had been consumed by hatred and fear. The path ahead would be long and fraught with dangers she couldn't yet imagine. Still, for the first time since she could remember, it felt like a path worth walking. 3 months after the first contact with the Keplerians, the galaxy was experiencing something unprecedented: voluntary ceasefires. It began with small conflicts, border disputes between minor systems, resource competitions between struggling colonies. But as word of the understanding spread, larger factions began requesting Keplerian intervention. Zara stood in the observation lounge of the newly established peace station Harmony, watching as ships from former enemy fleets shared the same space without weapons targeting each other. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, a joint project between 12 different species, using Keplerian bioorganic technology as the foundation and each species contributing their unique capabilities. The integration rate is accelerating beyond our projections, reported Dr. Kim, who had become something of a celebrity as one of the first non-Keplerians to achieve full understanding. We now have over 10,000 beings who have completed at least the first 3 levels, and they're creating ripple effects throughout their populations. Dr. Kim had changed dramatically over the past months, though the changes were subtle enough that many people didn't notice them immediately. She moved with a fluid grace that hadn't been there before, and when she spoke, people found themselves listening with unusual attention. Most remarkably, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to identify the core issues underlying any conflict. What about resistance? Zara asked. Growing, unfortunately, Dr. Kim replied. The faster peace spreads, the more threatened the war profiteers and power-hungry leaders become. We're seeing the emergence of what some are calling the Final War Coalition, factions determined to prevent the understanding from taking hold. As if summoned by their conversation, Lieutenant Torres approached with a grim expression. Commander, we're receiving priority transmissions from 17 sectors. The Coalition has launched coordinated attacks on ships carrying Keplerian teachers. Zara felt her heart sink. She had known this moment would come, the point where those who benefited from chaos and conflict would organize to preserve their positions. Casualties? 3 Keplerian bioships destroyed, along with their passenger vessels. Estimated loss of life is in the thousands, including 47 beings who had achieved understanding. The loss of the understanding integrated beings was particularly devastating. Each one represented not just an individual tragedy, but the loss of someone capable of teaching others the path to peace. The Keplerians, despite their advanced technology, were surprisingly vulnerable to conventional weapons. Their bioships were designed for harmony with natural forces, not military defense. There's more, Torres continued reluctantly. The Coalition has made a public declaration. They're calling for the total extermination of the Keplerians and anyone who has undergone understanding, claiming it's a form of alien mind control that threatens the natural order of galactic civilization. Zara closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of despair settling over her. For a brief moment, it had seemed like peace might actually be possible. But now the galaxy was polarizing into those who embraced understanding and those who violently rejected it. Dr. Kim, she said, in your opinion, is there any way to protect the understanding process from this kind of organized resistance? Dr. Kim was quiet for a long moment, her expression taking on the inward-focused look that Zara had learned meant she was consulting the deeper levels of her understanding. When she spoke, her voice carried a quality of certainty that was both reassuring and unsettling. Commander, the question itself reveals a misunderstanding of how the process works. Understanding cannot be protected through conventional defensive measures because it operates on a different level of reality. The Coalition's attacks are actually accelerating the very process they're trying to prevent. How is that possible? Each act of violence against those carrying understanding creates what the Keplerians call resonance patterns in the quantum field. The more extreme the violence, the stronger the resonance. Beings throughout the galaxy are beginning to feel, at a subconscious level, the difference between the peace emanating from understanding and the chaos emanating from the Coalition's actions. As if to demonstrate Dr. Kim's point, their conversation was interrupted by an incoming transmission from the Keplerian home system. Synthesis appeared on the holographic display, but its usual calm demeanor was replaced by something that might have been urgency. Commander Okafor, Dr. Kim, we require your immediate assistance. The attacks on our teachers have triggered what we call a critical understanding event. Meaning? Zara asked. The emotional and quantum disturbances caused by the Coalition's violence have reached a threshold where the galaxy's consciousness field is beginning to polarize permanently. We have perhaps days before the patterns lock into place. If that happens, the galaxy will split into 2 distinct reality streams, one based on understanding and cooperation, the other locked into permanent conflict. Dr. Kim leaned forward intently. What would that mean practically? Species and individuals aligned with understanding would become literally unable to perceive or interact with those locked in conflict patterns, and vice versa. The galaxy would effectively split into 2 separate universes occupying the same physical space. The implications hit Zara like a physical blow. That would mean the end of any possibility for universal peace. Synthesis confirmed. Some beings would achieve harmony, but billions of others would be trapped forever in cycles of violence. This is what we meant when we said the current trajectory could cause irreversible damage to the cosmic consciousness field. Zara looked around the observation lounge, at the representatives of different species working together in ways that would have been impossible just months ago. The idea that this fragile beginning of cooperation could be severed permanently was unbearable. What do you need from us? She asked. We need to accelerate the understanding process beyond anything we have attempted before. Instead of gradual integration over weeks or months, we need to share the first level of understanding with millions of beings simultaneously. Dr. Kim looked troubled. Synthesis, is that safe? The integration process requires careful preparation and willing participation. Under normal circumstances, you would be correct. But the critical understanding event has created what might be called a teachable moment for the galaxy's consciousness. The contrast between peace and violence has become so stark that many beings are unconsciously ready to receive understanding, even if they don't realize it consciously. How do we reach millions of beings simultaneously? Zara asked. Synthesis's expression shifted to patterns Zara was beginning to recognize as determination mixed with uncertainty. We have developed a theoretical framework for transmitting understanding through existing communication networks. Every holovision broadcast, every quantum message relay, every emergency alert system could become a carrier for the fundamental insights of the first level. A viral transmission of peace, Dr. Kim murmured. It's elegant, but the risks are considerable, Synthesis agreed. If the transmission is incomplete or misunderstood, it could create confusion or resistance instead of understanding. And there are technical challenges. We would need to coordinate with every major communication network in the galaxy. Zara felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. The plan was audacious beyond anything she had ever imagined, but the alternative, a galaxy permanently divided between peace and war, was unacceptable. What would this transmission contain? She asked. The core insight of the first level, the direct experiential knowledge that all conscious beings are part of a larger pattern, that harming others ultimately harms oneself, and that cooperation serves everyone's interests better than competition or conflict. And you believe this could work? Commander, Synthesis said, its skin patterns shifting to what Zara had learned represented deep conviction. We have modeled every possible outcome. Without this intervention, the galaxy will lock into permanent conflict within 72 hours. With it, we have a 67% probability of achieving lasting peace. The odds weren't great, but they were better than the alternative. Zara looked at Dr. Kim, who nodded slowly. I'll help coordinate the transmission, Dr. Kim said. My understanding should allow me to adapt the Keplerian insights for different species' neurological patterns. As they began planning the most ambitious peace initiative in galactic history, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to trigger events that would reshape the universe itself. She just hoped they would reshape it for the better. But unknown to any of them, the Final War Coalition had intercepted their communications and was preparing their own intervention, one designed to ensure that if the galaxy was going to split, it would split in their favor.